All right, everybody. Welcome to Standing for Truth. I am your host, Donnie, and on Standing for Truth, we focus on the truth of biblical creation. We also host interviews, debates, discussions, lectures, and more. Now, if you enjoy the content coming out of this ministry, please hit that subscribe button and make sure to share around our material, as the truth is important. Now, tonight, I should say, we have the much anticipated show with Professor David McQueen. David McQueen, brother, thank you so much for being here. We've missed you. You are an incredible blessing to this ministry. Professor McQueen, how you been?
Thank you so much for your kindness. And I want to thank the Standing for Truth audience for their prayers regarding Mrs. McQueen. She had open heart surgery more than 20 days ago and is doing well, improving 1% per day. And I want to thank you for your prayers for her. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that, Professor McQueen. You and Mrs. McQueen have been in our prayers, and we're glad to see you back. You're a fan favorite, and as people have seen on the website, you are in the Meet the Team section. So if you want to see Professor McQueen's biography as well, please check that out. So before we introduce the topic, a couple reminders to anybody who has not yet watched our epic show yesterday. I was joined by Dr. Fuzz Rana, and we refuted all arguments pertaining to junk DNA. We touched on pseudogenes, endogenous retroviruses, ALU sequences, the ENCODE project, as well as refuting major challenges put forth by evolutionary biologists against the ENCODE results. We know that there are a lot of voices that are what would be considered anti-ENCODE, and we really address those challenges and concerns as well. So please don't forget to check that out. We're also going to be back here this Thursday for another epic debate on evolution. Is there reasonable evidence for evolution? Luca Medugno and Kent Hovind. So that's definitely going to be a must-watch debate. So that being said, guys, also check the upcoming live stream section, because if I were to go over all the events that we have scheduled and planned, it'd probably take me 20 minutes. So go check the upcoming live stream section or the event section on our website for all the upcoming events, debates, lectures, so on and so forth that we have. So let's waste no more time, guys. George, my award-winning co-host, is also here. Brother George, thanks for joining us for this important show on why evolution is useless.
Yeah, thanks, Donnie. I watched that Fuzz Runner interview before this stream, and it was excellent, to be honest. I'll start off with my usual short prayer. May the Spirit of God open your eyes to the light, your ears to the truth, and your heart to His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. I think it's appropriate. Sorry, I stepped away for a few minutes before. I'm not sure whether you covered this, but can we take a moment to remember those who tragically lost their lives on September 11th?
Yes, I as a matter of fact, when we go to my 5-minute intro and your 5-minute intro, I'm going to spend my 5 minutes on 9/11. This is the 20th anniversary today here in the States. And so before I turn to not junk DNA, but junk geology, which is our topic tonight, I'll take the hard hat off and rotate it away from the geology part and think about the firemen and so forth that were so brave 20 years ago. Our format is going to be a format that you all in our audience, or what George and I think of as our class, have responded so well to. And that is, I'm going to give a 5-minute introduction. Then George is going to give a 5-minute introduction. I will go for 20 minutes on my first topic, which focuses on evolution being absolutely useless when it comes to economic geology, copper, lead, zinc, oil and gas, coal. Then George will go for 20 minutes. You all have responded so well to our 20-minute question and answer time. I'm going to ask Standing for Truth to moderate that up until our 1 hour break. And then when we come back, we'll go through the same format again for the second hour. George, you like that style?
Yes, but I think I'm going to need about 2 hours to cover everything that I've
Yes,
got.
I've seen your outline, my friend. I know that's true.
I'll condense it. I probably won't go into
Okay,
all the
good.
details, but yeah.
I'll go ahead and begin with the first 5 minutes worth. I was working as a professional hydrogeologist 20 years ago today, and I was driving to a railroad facility several hours south of my work location in northern Louisiana. And on the radio, I heard about the strike. Now, I know enough about World War II history and the history of the 20th century to know that there was a time that a bomber, of all things, hit the Empire State Building. And, some people were injured, but it wasn't a catastrophe. So I pulled in to a hospital and went in. This is 20 years ago, before cell phones were common. And I went back to the doctor's lounge and was actually standing there when the second plane hit. So when the second plane hit, I had been taught enough by my dad and others to know that this was a terrorist attack and not an accident like that bomber in the 20th century. And so I began watching it. When I finally got to the railroad, the President of the United States had activated a nationwide lockdown. We're not talking about the COVID lockdown here. We're talking about a lockdown of every strategic part of America, which included the railroads. And so I got down there and could not get entry. The consulting engineers that I was meeting, they couldn't get in. So we went to a local restaurant and watched TV as everyone else did on that tragic day. Equally surprising was the plane that landed at the Pentagon and the plane that heroically was downed in Pennsylvania by the passengers. And so honor is due for all those first responders that went in. And that is my tribute on this day. George, let me turn it over to your first 5 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. Like yourself, I actually remember that event quite vividly. I actually had a very small procedure done at a hospital, and I was actually under anaesthetic, and I was actually recovering. And I recall watching it on television, and to be honest, truthfully honest, I thought I was watching a Hollywood movie.
Unbelievable.
No kidding. Like before we actually begin though, we need to define our terms, because by the theory of evolution, we mean that the claim that the common descent of all life on Earth is from a common ancestor. You've all heard rock soup with a dash of lightning, creating the first life, and then here we are. So that's really what I'd like to start with. But there was a good 1.5 minute video that produced by SFT some time ago, which, funny enough, is titled "Evolution is a Useless Theory." So I'd like to play that just for 1.5 minutes before we get into our 20-minute stuff. So just bear with me. I'm going to share the screen.
No problem.
So can you see that, Donnie?
Yes, and just make sure that you
I forgot to click the
share audio.
Sorry, just hold on a second. I'll do that again because I forgot to share the audio.
No problem.
And
And
by
as
the
you're
way,
doing that, too, well, I was just going to point out as you're doing that, George, to everybody in the audience, tag me with your questions for Professor McQueen and also for George. So,
as he does that, I'm reading this first one about the Hawaiian Islands. How in the world do creationists explain that? So we'll come to that argument when we get to the Q&A part.
Okay, I'm ready.
go ahead.
Well, the sky is falling is what he's trying to say, folks. If we believe in creation, everything's going to fall apart. I mean, all the sciences have to be thrown out. That's ludicrous. All the branches of science were started by creationists. The evolution theory has done nothing for the advancement of science. That's not why we put a man on the moon. That's not why you can do open heart surgery. Evolution is a useless theory, even if it's true. It is absolutely useless as far as science goes. You don't have to believe in creation or evolution to study science. You can learn about the biceps, the triceps, the deltoid, and all the different muscles of the body and never get into origins. It doesn't matter. No doctor doing surgery cares at all about evolution while he's cutting somebody's heart out to replace it. It's a useless theory. And then there is no advancement in modern science from this evolution theory. The Big Bang theory, I think, is a great hindrance to, and many other theories about evolution are a great hindrance to science. There's all kinds of evidence against the Big Bang. The counter rotation of at least 2 planets, Venus and Uranus. At least 8 of the 91 known moons are spinning backwards. Some whole galaxies are spinning backwards. 3 planets have moons going both directions at the same time. This can't happen with Big Bang. You need to study some physics on that one. Thank you.
People with ADHD.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point, George. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries. Yeah.
Good. I'll go ahead and begin now with my 20 minutes, and then I'll turn it over to you, George, for yours. I have my geologist hard hat on here and got my rock hammer. And I hope you all noticed that we have this superhero theme based on the Marvel comic books that I collected as a boy. Since I have a green vest on, I wonder which one I will be. Let's see, there was green. Oh, we'll think about that. I'm not a superhero. I'm a geologist. And as a geologist, I have spent the last 50 years studying maps like you see behind me, which is a Bouguer gravity map, which we'll cover in the second hour. And I want to assure you that when I go to the field, I may take a communication device like this radio here. I may take a pocket watch to make sure that I can know what time of day it is, even if the internet goes down. I have pens to write things down, my field notebook, and I go to the field looking for copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver. I go looking for oil and gas and other things like coal. And so let me make a very strong point, and I welcome the evolutionary geologists, the deep time part of the group that watches our presentations. I would challenge any of you to debate me on the following points. Now, students, go ahead and get your notes out and write this down. Not a barrel of oil, not a cubic foot of natural gas, not a ton of coal, not an ounce of gold, not a ton of iron ore, or a pound of copper. None of those 6 things have ever been discovered by the systematic application of evolutionary thinking or deep time thinking. So from a practical standpoint, evolution is useless if you intend to find metals and crude oil and natural gas that is useful to civilization. But not just our civilization, but the civilization from the time of Adam up to the time of the Great Flood. Here in the American South, we talk about old houses built before the Civil War. We call them antebellum houses before the war. And so there are localities and places that are antediluvian, in other words, before the time of the Great Flood. Then you have the flood itself, which did a tremendous amount of geologic work, including the emplacement of oil deposits, the emplacement of zinc and other metal deposits. And then you've got the post-flood time. And in that post-flood time, the 8 people on board the ark departed with the animals, the land-dwelling animals, and began to move across the earth. The map that you see behind me is centered on what's called the Great Lakes. And so many of you may know about Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, so that the lower right-hand corner of this map behind me, the one that's right there, that includes the sedimentary rocks around Lake Michigan. We're going to be talking about this peninsula here called the Keweenaw Peninsula and the native copper deposits that are found there. Now, why would this be worth bringing up? It turns out that it is an aspect of God's grace that has allowed us to find crude oil and the Michigan copper deposits. We will save Michigan for the second hour. But let's go now to the Middle East and do some talking about the biggest oil fields on earth. Well, they are found in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. They have exotic names like the Bergan Field, which is primarily a sandstone reservoir, and then the Gawar Supergiant Field in Saudi, which is predominantly a limestone reservoir. As a young geologist 40 years ago, my mentor, Lynn Harris, took me out in East Tennessee and showed me this stromatolite deposit in the early flood rocks called the Canberra Ordovician rocks. And George, respond this to me. Do you see all the vugs and holes in this as I hold it up to the camera?
Oh, yes, I do. Yep.
Now,
Very
imagine that to be underneath Saudi Arabia. This is carbonate. This is a stromatolite. Would you say that the porosity and permeability of a rock like this would be remarkable?
Very much so. That's where you'd normally find things like oil.
Exactly. And so how did they find these enormous oil deposits in the Middle East? There's an old joke that if during the Exodus, all of the Israelites had turned south instead of north, they'd be rich now because they'd be right in the middle of the Middle Eastern oil fields. But they turned toward Israel as God directed them. How did they find these deposits? Well, the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, as they multiplied, they built the Tower of Babel, the twin towers of, if you want to think of it today, of Genesis chapter 11. After the Tower of Babel, they dispersed. They were had language groups. Everybody that could understand Buenos Dias, they all got together. Those that said Guten Morgen, wie geht es Ihnen? The Australians that were cooking shrimp on a Barbie, they all got together. A little humor there, George.
Yeah, I got it.
And so they began to move as nation groups. The group that went to Saudi were walking around and they saw these oil seeps. And they went over to them and they got some of the oil and they saw they could use it medicinally. They saw that they could rub the crude oil on their skin and the mosquitoes wouldn't get them. And then they obviously figured out that it was flammable. Okay, let's move forward in time to the time right after and before World War II, from the 30s up through the 40s. The British geologists that had already found crude oil deposits in other places, they go to the locals there, the Bedouin and so forth, and say, well, have you seen any oil seeps? Do you have any tar pits? And so the Bedouin said, sure. So they got into the Jeeps with the Brits. Now you have to understand that I have Scottish blood in me, so it's natural for me to be critical of the Brits and their mental acuity. So they all drive toward the tar pits, but they went a little bit too fast and they got stuck. The Jeep got stuck. And the Brits turned to each other and said, hey, why don't we put an oil well down here? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, when they put the oil well down there, George, and struck these enormously porous rocks, the rate of flow was the rate of flow as if they had hit an underground storage tank full of oil. And so it is even today. The ease which these petroleum deposits, the crude oil and the natural gas, come out of this area is phenomenal. As a matter of fact, 10% of all the oil that God gave us is from this area in Saudi and Kuwait. So let me summarize my 20 minutes by saying this. It was not hard to find these crude oil deposits because God, by his grace, allowed people to step in them. And then the Brits come and set up what's called Aramco, Arabian American Oil Company. And so the wealth that flowed into Saudi and Kuwait is a result of God's grace. Now, McQueen, why would you say that? These guys are followers of Islam. Well, keep in mind that there are only three world religions that are creationist. There is Christianity, obviously. There is Judaism, because they believe the Torah. But keep in mind that the followers of Islam also believe in Noah's flood. And so in that sense, they are in our circle. Were they in our circle 20 years ago? Does radical Islam bring good things? I think we know the answer to that. Standing for truth. George, you have a comment before you begin your part?
Yeah, David, I just want to correct you. The actual way they actually found oil was, and Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies proved it, he fired at a rabbit and missed, and the bullet hit the ground, the oil percolated out of the ground. So that's how they found the oil, David, just to correct you, okay?
In my teenage years, I watched that show. I should have known. Thank you, George.
So did I. All right, I'm going to share the screen, Donnie. So this might offend some evolutionists, so I'm sorry about that. But I'm about giving you the truth here. So just bear with me while I. There's no audio involved, so
You're good.
Okay, can you see that?
Rock soup.
Yeah. Okay. Look, there are basically.
Hey, it's the primordial soup.
Yeah.
So it does exist.
Yes. There are basically two models that explain the origin of life, okay? Number one is that all the basic life forms which may be observed in the world around us and in the fossil record were created supernaturally and instantaneously. Yes, I'm saying this unashamedly. God did it. Or as evolutionists like to say, God done it. Okay, number two is over billions of years, atoms came together by accident to form complex organisms. As I said, I call it rock soup with a dash of lightning. But let's focus on the practical aspects of these alternate views. In my opinion, only one can be true, and the one that is true will have practical implications. The true hypothesis will provide a foundational perspective which will be very valuable in answering the questions identified by science. Now, I saw a comment by one of the people in the chat who stated, let me just go to that. He stated that what Kent said was absolutely false. He said that agriculture, conservation, virology, and medicine all disagree with you. I'm here to tell you, Andrew, that my daughter is a research scientist, and I asked her this question about whether they use the theory of evolution in their fields, and the answer was categorically no. They use the scientific method. It's empirically based. They measure things. They observe things. They repeat it. They create graphs of all this data to create predictability. So no, it's all about empirical science, the scientific method that a Christian actually developed. So there you go. A creationist actually developed the current scientific method. Now you'll often hear that by the evolutionists that because we share 50% of our DNA with bananas, that proves common ancestry. Well, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't. It proves a common designer, just as valid as yours. But we'll continue on and explain why we think evolution is useless. You would have heard many times by evolutionists how bacteria have evolved antibiotic treatments. But before I get into that discussion, I want to just show you some quotes from Susan Mazur of some of the things that she heard at the Altenberg 16. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but they hold a conference every so many years on many topics. And one of them that discussed is actually evolution. So here we go. This is from her book, okay? This is from Jerry Fodor, American philosopher and cognitive scientist. He says, basically, I don't think anybody knows how evolution works. Then you go to this quote. We are grappling with the increasing feeling that we just don't have the theoretical and analytical tools necessary to make sense of the bewildering diversity and complexity of living organisms. Okay, then another quote. The Altenberg 16 recognized that the theory of evolution, which is most practicing biologists accept and which is taught in classrooms today, is inadequate in explaining our existence. A wave of scientists now question natural selection's role, though fewer will publicly admit it. And we know why they will not admit it and what it will happen to them if they do. Okay, it's also an exercise in bullying. There's many have spoken about the descent that occurs and what happens to those that actually do that. But evolutionary science, as you can read there, is as much about the posturing, salesmanship, stonewalling, and bullying that goes on as it is about actual scientific theory.
Amen.
Yeah, and in short, it's a modern-day quest for the Holy Grail, but with few knights. Isn't that ironical? At a time that calls for scientific vision, scientific inquiry has been hijacked by the industry of greed with evolution books hyped like snake oil at a carnival. And natural selection is not the answer. And I think most evolutionists now accept that. Scientists agree that natural selection can occur, but the scientific community also knows that natural selection has little to do with long-term changes in populations. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to give you some examples of this, this claim of bacteria becoming antibiotic resistant. Now, these are a couple of examples. This one comes from the National Geographic magazine. It's about what Darwin didn't know about evolution. So the quote says, sample of a form of pathogenic bacteria that causes the disease Shigella which is a sort of dysentery. The particular bug is called Shigella flexneri and was isolated from a British soldier named Ernest Cable in 1915 during World War I, when he died in a hospital in France from dysentery, which killed a lot of soldiers. The specimen was tucked away at a Porton Down until about a decade ago, when one tube of the samples was pulled out, thawed, regrown in a laboratory by a team of scientists led by one Kate Baker, and its genome was examined. Lo and behold, one of the things they found out about this 1915 sample of bacteria was that it was already resistant to penicillin. Hello, people. Whoa, wait a minute. Penicillin hadn't even been discovered yet. That's one example. Another example comes from the Sunday Herald, September 16. I think, this one's titled Ed Struzik was the author, Ancient Bacteria Revived. It says, quote, scientists at the University of Alberta have revived bacteria from members of the historic Franklin expedition who mysteriously perished in the Arctic over 150 years ago. Not only are the 6 strains of bacteria almost certainly the oldest ever revived, says medical microbiologist Dr. Kinga Kowaleszka Groszkowska, sorry about that. 3 of them also happen to be resistant to antibiotic named clindamycin and cefoxitin, both of which were developed more than a century after the men died, were almost those used. So here we go, guys. Another example of antibiotics, bacteria being resistant to antibiotics is a load of baloney. These bacteria already had that particular trait in them. And this one comes from the Science Daily. It's the title of it is Antibiotic Resistance. Genes are essentially everywhere. The quote says, the largest metagenomic search for antibiotic resistance genes in the DNA sequence of microbial communities from around the globe has found that the bacteria carrying those vexing genes turn up everywhere in nature that scientists look for them. The findings reported in the Cell Press journal Current Biology on May the 8th add to the evidence showing just how common and abundant those resistant genes really are in natural environments. Okay, now you heard us talk about junk DNA, and as I said, the interview with Dr. Rayno was excellent. I point you to that particular show that was aired, I think, a couple of days ago. But I'll just cite a few things. Many evolutionists will usually scramble to defend the notion that the term junk DNA never did mean junk. This is the game they play. This junk DNA of our genome was proudly, if you can remember, touted at the time as junk by evolutionists and was provided as proof of our evolutionary past. You see, the concept of junk DNA was and still is crucial to evolutionary theory.
And George?
Yes.
I just want to let you know, as you're going through that awesome information there, I'm just screen sharing some information and technical papers confirming and backing up what you're saying. So keep going,
Thank you
brother.
for doing that.
No worries. Thank you. I've got those references. If people want them, I can put them in the comments section. Just let me know. But you'll find with interest that when junk DNA was discovered, it was proof for evolution. And when they found out that 80% of this junk was found to be functional, they then claimed that that was proof of evolution. So either way, everything seems to be evolution. This is unbelievable. How could that be scientific? I think I can't remember who the person said it. They actually said that if a theory claims to know everything, then it knows nothing. I'm just paraphrasing there because I can't remember the exact quote. So,
George, let me interrupt for a moment. The 1 hour break comes at 7:30. You want to take a few questions now?
I'll just point to one more thing, David, before I finish my one. So I'm gonna share my screen for a second, Donnie, if you don't mind. Just bear with me.
You're all good. You're all good, brother.
Yep. Just going to find. Here we go. So you talk about peer. You know, we often hear about peer-reviewed science papers, and we often actually provide these to them, their own papers. But please bear in mind that there are serious replication crises with these science papers, as you can see in that particular article. In 2016, a poll of 1,500 scientists reported in the journal Nature. So it's not a blog spot or anything like that. But read it. 70% of them failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. 50% failed to reproduce their own experiments. And these are some of the statistics there. In chemistry, 90% of those particular experiments failed to be reproduced. 60% of them were failed to be reproduced by themselves. Similarly with biology, 80%, physics and engineering, medicine, earth and environmental science. So I don't know why we put so much trust in these peer-reviewed science papers if these kind of statistics show that they're very unreliable. I mean, I always say, let's do independent studies of these experiments and verify them before they're published. That's all I'm asking, is for them to be verified independently by others before they're published. Not peer-reviewed by someone who knows about the subject, but they need to be verified and reproduced based on the methodology that's specified in that particular paper. Okay, I'll stop sharing and sort of end my part of it there, but I've got, as I say, a shed load, yes, SHED, a shed load of other evidences, but I don't have the time to do that. So
let's go now, Standing for Truth.
Do some of these
You
questions.
pick a question that you've got one come across, and I will answer this question from Lloyd about the geologic column. But let's do one thing at a time. You pick one for us there, Standing for Truth.
Perfect. So we got some great questions already, as we usually do, guys. So thank you for the questions from the live chat. So this first question is, Professor David McQueen, how can young Earth creationists explain the existence of the Hawaiian Islands?
Well, it's a very good point. And if you go back to one of the presentations that George and I did a month ago, you'll find that we did a discussion about what we are calling the heat problem. Now, in my absence during Ms. McQueen's sickness, George has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue of how heat can be transferred from the outer core through the mantle to the crust. And one area of this that is of interest is the Hawaiian Islands. It turns out there are some BLOBS. Now, George's pronunciation, it's a bit different than mine, but I would call it a blob. There are some areas underneath the Hawaiian Islands that we are doing the investigation on to see if they are conduits to take heat from the lower crust down to beyond the mantle into the outer core. Now, the standard answer for the explanation of the Hawaiian Islands is that during the time of the Great Flood, there were tremendous upheavals of what the Bible will call the fountains of the great deep. And let me draw a picture. I'm having computer trouble on my side, and I have a subscreen that won't go away. but I'll need you all to tell me if you can see these two dots and
Yes.
the arrow in between. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Imagine this to be the location of, and I'll use FD to stand for the fountain of the great deep, and I'll put a north arrow on here. So there's the fountain of the great deep erupting during the time of the flood. The plate that includes the other Hawaiian Islands moves, and as it moves, I've got this arrow drawn incorrectly. That fountain of the great deep goes to the northwest, and you have another upwelling and another volcano. In 1985, Ms. McQueen and I vacationed in Hawaii, and I got to see Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, and some of the volcanoes rather that are there, and they are perfectly well described. As a matter of fact, they have a better explanation than the old Earth deep time idea. Okay, back to you, Standing for Truth. What should our next question be?
As always, great response, Professor McQueen. So next question comes in from Ryan Lloyd. Question is, does the geological column give gradual ages or are they assumed? And then he says, thank you.
Okay, let me give 60 seconds worth of that and then turn it over to George, because I know he's thought about this a great deal. The geologic column that goes from Precambrian through Cambrian all the way up. Remember the poem that I was taught 50 years ago? Carry out some dinner, Miss Penny Pearl, to Johnny Clock the Queen. Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, carry out some dinner, Miss Devonian. I've used the poem so much I have to think of what the column is. So it's Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian. Those of you that are international will use the word Carboniferous next. Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, Permian. That's the Paleozoic era, as it's called. And you go on up to the modern time. They do not give gradual ages. As a matter of fact, I'll give one example. Dr. Adam Sedgwick, who is also a Reverend Adam Sedgwick, was teaching in England, and he would always take his students out to look at a group of sandstones that had a green mineral called glauconite in it and trilobite fossils. And so he would write on the board. I can see him over and over again writing on the board. We're going to go take a look at this in Wales. Well, it turns out the old Celtic tribe of the Cambri was in the area of his field trips. And so he decided one day, I'm not going to write all this. Why don't we call this the Cambrian? And so he went out, and the word Cambrian was coined based on geography, not deep time or anything like that. It was coined by a pastor who was also a professor. And so it was coined by a creationist. Can you elaborate on that, George?
Yeah, well, the geologic column, I think, began as a way to discredit the science of Moses, as Lyell mentioned. So the original ages of those columns were assumed to be much less than what they are today. And of course, we know that they've now used radiometric dating systems to make assumptions which place them much older than they really are. But we know that those radiometric dating systems have got many assumptions built into them, and how they're flawed. I mean, we've spoken lots of times about this subject where it seems they're able to tell ages of unknown rocks, but for known rocks, they seem to fail every time. and their own analyses also proves them wrong too. If anyone knows about the KBS Tough, I think it was not Lenski. Who was that paleontologist? I can't remember his name, but they dated a number of layers based on what they found, based on fossils that they found, and they got completely wrong answers, contradictory answers, that they just kept doing those tests until they found something that they liked.
Yeah, let me interject there. I want to hammer home the truth of what you say. In my studies of the Southern Appalachian Mountains, which I did in the 1970s, there is a famous marble in North Carolina, South Carolina border called the Murphy Marble Belt. I found a paper 40 years ago that reported a trilobite being found in this Murphy Marble Belt. Now, many of the deep time geologists that were my supervisors discounted this. Why? Because the radiometric date showed that this Murphy Marble Belt was much older than 600 million years old, much older than 500 million years old, which is what the fossil date would give. But you know what, George? The geologists that I work with, the field geologists, they took the fossil over the radiometric date. If there's a trilobite there, it's Cambrian. Let's forget the radiometric dating. Interesting thing, isn't it, George?
Yes, and it goes back a while now, but I think it might have been 6 to 8 months ago. Donnie and Steph Arena and myself, we streamed about a 2-hour episode of the claim that it takes long evolutionary ages to find oil and gas, and we disproved that completely. Yet they continue to use that argument, even though I presented literal secular sources to show how the oil is actually found, and none of them, absolutely not one, mention dating of rocks.
Yes, very true.
Yeah.
Okay, standing for truth, let's go to another questions, please.
So I got a question here. I pulled it up on the screen. We got a ton of questions flying in, so hopefully we can get to all of these or most of them. This question comes in from Kamachi. He says, question, is the lava dome of Mount St. Helens true lava? What age should those rocks date according to radiometric dating versus when it was made?
Okay, let me start with the comment, and then George can pick up from there. There's no question that Mount St. Helens is a volcano. There's no question that when it blew its top in 1980, while I was teaching Geology 101 at George Mason University near Washington, D.C., what a wonderful illustration of volcanology that was. When it blew its top, there was a volcanic ash cloud that went a great distance. Now, we have to be very careful that we are good geologists. And so those of you that are taking notes, you need to write this down. Igneous rocks are divided into 2 broad categories, what are called intrusive, assumed to be granites, and what are called extrusive, which are lavas and so forth. And so if you look at extrusive igneous rocks, there's no question that Mount St. Helens is that kind of rock. Now, we don't have time today to go into the different categories of extrusive igneous rocks. We don't have time to talk about every aspect of basalt or every aspect of granodiorites or every aspect of volcaniclastics. It's beyond the scope. But be assured, as not only that I'm a geologist, but I've worked around Dr. Steve Austin, who himself has studied this for the last 40 years at Mount St. Helens. This is a applicable volcanic eruption. You want to add to that, George?
Yeah. Well, we did a stream also on the Chicxulub claim that it was proof of vast extinction. I think
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's a good
one of the evolutionists mentioned that every geologist, and they made the claim that every geologist, including creationists, agree that the Chicxulub was an impact site, a meteorite impact site, and it resulted in the extinction of life on Earth. And one of the things we found there, David, was these lava domes are really recognizable features of volcano explosions. It's not just at Mount St. Helens, but pretty much most volcanoes. You'll see a lava dome form after the explosion. So it's a common feature of a actual volcano erupting, or once it's finished erupting. And I believe I believe the one at St. Helens is actually growing. I'm not sure of the rate that it's growing, but it's growing. So I think they're looking at it from the point of view whether they can predict when it will actually go off again.
No. We're coming up on the 1 hour break. Donnie, pick another question for us.
So here's the next question I had that I think is important. I've heard this being said by the critics quite a lot lately, Professor McQueen. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it, both you and George. So the critics claim that we cannot date rocks of known age because there's not been enough time for the decay of the parent isotope. And therefore, we would expect to get a wrong date. So in other words, they're saying that we shouldn't be looking to these examples of dates derived from rocks of unknown age because it's bad methodology. Is this just a rescue device, or what are your thoughts on this, gentlemen?
Yeah, it's a.
Can I just add a little bit to that? Well, Donnie, if that's the case, they should be giving a 0 date. If these things don't have the daughter elements, then they should be giving a 0 date.
And let me jump in here with one of my favorite comments. I never wanted to date rocks because I met Mrs. McQueen 50 years ago. I'd rather date redheads myself. But if you insist on dating rocks, you need to understand this diagram here. Remember that rocks, and I'll use RX for that, rocks are formed because of minerals. So let me hold it up to the screen here. You see rocks are formed of minerals. So actually what you're dating are the minerals inside the rock. The standard rescue device that the evolutionary community uses, Mount St. Helens erupts, or there's a lava flow in the Grand Canyon. And so when you go in to measure those minerals that I'm showing there, you're measuring minerals that are ancient. Even though the lava may have flowed out at in Hawaii, that lava, that basaltic lava, is going to carry minerals that have an old and give an old date. Now, there's quite a critique of that, but let's think of it like this. Let's imagine this pin here, as I move it across the screen, to be a motorcycle driving on the road in Hawaii back in the 1980s. And then let's pick up the Play-Doh and have the Play-Doh come over the top of this as a lava flow. So if we find a 1970 classic Harley Davidson inside this lava, what do we know? We know that this lava flowed out after 1970.
Yeah.
Because we got something we know that can be dated. So whether it's a motorcycle or a 55 Chevy that gets buried under one of these modern lava flows, it doesn't matter what the radiometric dating says. We know that it had to be after 1955 or after when the Harley Davidson was formed. And so that is that's one way to approach it. Now, exactly why the evolutionary community will say, you guys at Standing Truth, have not properly covered isochron dating. You all have not properly covered the issue of this or that. These are rescue devices, which between now and Christmas, George and I can take a whole 2 hours on something like isochron dating and show the problems with it. What do you
David?
think, George?
Yeah, David, for those that are interested, I actually watched a Wazaloo, that's Ian Juby video. He's now in the process of updating some of the information in his videos. He actually had a stream this morning, which I've watched, and I put a link to that in the chat in the comment section. What he's actually going through the geological layer, and he's actually stating in some of those layers at the Grand Canyon, they have actually found Native American Indian artifacts in layers that are supposedly hundreds of millions of years old. So it goes to your analogy about the 1970s Lincoln or Pontiac under the lava flow.
Yeah.
So that's one way you can actually disprove it. But do you think they'll listen to that?
Well, they won't, because you have to understand there's a standard American Indian artifact argument from the Grand Canyon that goes back to the days of its early exploration in the 1800s. If you go up to the Red Wall limestone or you go up to the Coconino sandstone and you find a bowl that's obviously been made by a descendant of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, what we would call a Western American Indian or Native American, if you find it there, the evolutionary community goes, "Oh, you stupid. They dug a little hole there and they buried their pot in that hole. Are you stupid? You know, you've got to know that all these rocks of the Grand Canyon are older than the Ordovician or older than the Cambrian or older than the Coconino. And so they've got to be millions of years old. Are you saying that humans and dinosaurs existed together? Are you saying that people were alive before the formation of the rocks in the Grand Canyon?" And see, it's a rescue device because why? Let me pick up my Bible here. I'm emphasizing here the New Testament. The Bible clearly points out that the Great Flood occurred and that there were people alive before the flood. And so we're coming up now on the 1 hour break, and I'm going to ask your all's, Standing for Truth and George, I'm having trouble with a sub window that simply will not go away, that's blocking my view of George's face. And what could I do for all this time and not have a view of George's face? So I'm going to actually log off, and I want to be able to come back to the feed. Is that going to be a problem?
No, it won't be a problem.
No.
Just make sure you click the same link, Professor McQueen, that we sent through
Okay,
email
good.
an hour ago.
I will leave the discussion now to you guys. Take my standard, my 5-minute break is going to need to be a 10-minute break today because I've got to deal with this bizarre computer issue. So I'll go ahead and leave the room and see if I can fix this. I will see you guys in 5 or 10 minutes.
No problems.
Okay. Enjoy your break, Professor McQueen. We will see you shortly. 10 minutes is fine because we have some questions that I'll put up some slides for George, and then you can get your comments in there as well. Jamie Russell, thank you so much, brother. God bless you. You did not have to be so generous. We really appreciate it. As we always say, you guys are the life and blood of this channel. You guys are keeping us running full time, and we appreciate the support. So thank you so much. Again, Jamie, that's awesome. $50 super chat. So thank you, everybody in the chat, for your questions and for your comments and your support. That being said, reminder, we have an epic debate. There we go. Epic debate this Thursday. Is there reasonable evidence for evolution? Luca versus Kent Hovind. Got a lot of great theology-related debates at the end of the month. Did God command the slaughter of the Canaanites? C.J. Cox who's in the chat right now. Good to see you, brother. And Dr. Randall Rouser. They're going to be debating that important question. I'm also in the final stages of confirming some epic Trinity debates, with one of them being a huge debate between Matt Slick and Dr. Shabir Ali. So we're hoping to schedule that in October. So I'm definitely pumped for that. We've also got an epic soteriology debate coming up in a week or two. Lordship versus free grace. What is true biblical salvation? And of course, the main event for September debate is on September 30th, a CJ Cox versus Kent Hovind end times theology, pre-tribulation rapture versus post-tribulation rapture. Clearly, people love the end times theology topic because so far our record is still the end times theology debate, the epic end times theology debate between Stacy Turbeville and Kent Hovind. That was preterism versus post-tribulation rapture. I think that's sitting at 7,000 views or something like that. Last one I'll give you a reminder about is Dr. Kenny Rose and Michael the Canadian Atheist at the end of the month. The God debate, Christian God or no God. So tons of fun coming up, ladies and gentlemen. So Chris Peacock, I appreciate the questions. We love having our critics and skeptics in the chat. You guys bring some great questions, which always results in some great discussion and dialogue. So, Chris, thank you so much for the support and super chat. Cheryl says that's a lot of pizza. Yes, that's a lot of pizza, Jamie. I appreciate it. Probably bad for the diet, but George, you're invited, brother. If you can make your way over to Canada from Australia, I'll definitely save you a slice or two.
My motto, Donnie, is everything in moderation. Don't overdo it. Like most people hear me talk about pizza, but please be aware, I probably eat it once a week, if that. So it's just a bit of a joke, if you don't mind.
No, it's a good joke. Everything in moderation, like you said, brother. So that being said, George, we'll both get our comments on this before Professor McQueen comes back. There's a question here from the chat. Sam Jenkins. Someone mentioned to me that there are multiple evolutionary links in the fossil record. Example, whales, birds, the Homo line, etc. Could you guys comment on why these are no? I'm guessing why these are not. So let me share screen a little bit, go over some information on these so-called transitional forms. And George, we'll get some of your thoughts as well, brother. So starting with the so-called Homo line, right? Ape to man evolution and their so-called favorite icons, okay? In a nutshell, we can break this down in terms of what we see in the fossil record is always either one of three or four things, okay? We're either looking at fully human, degenerated human, fully ape, degenerated ape, or artificial species, okay? We've got even some of these secular paleoanthropologists admitting that certain specimens, such as Australopithecus sediba, consist of multiple bones from multiple species, and thus they're an artificial species. They're not real. Okay, so these have all been looked at. For example, here are the separation of ape and the human type. Every major claim is fiercely contested within the evolutionary paleo community, Neanderthal, Erectus. So what we can do is we can clearly tell, especially when we have enough bones and enough evidence. For example, we can tell that Neanderthalensis, I mean, we have their genetics, right? So we know Neanderthal was human, Erectus was human, Ardipithecus, okay, we know that that was nothing more than an extinct ape. We even know that Lucy, some of those bones in Australopithecus afarensis don't even belong to the Lucy species. Even Lee Berger, famous paleoanthropologist, has pointed out that afarensis may indeed be a chimeric species. Okay, that would be the same with Sediba, Habilis as well, wastebasket taxon, Hobbit. floresiensis, nothing more than a small-bodied Homo sapien. And you can tell that when you have a lot of these fragmented bones, right? Ardipithecus, 45% extremely crushed and broken. Lucy, only 20% complete, not 40% complete when you consider everything, hands and feet. Setiba, very fragmented. Habilis, of course, very fragmented. So with the most fragmented bones, okay, what you can do then is build the most fancy stories. But when you have skeletons that are nearly complete, like with Erectus or Neanderthalensis, you can clearly tell, especially when you have the genetics, you can clearly tell that what we're looking at is a human. I mean, look at Homo erectus here. Homo erectus may have been a sailor and able to speak. Okay, well, obviously that speaks of its humanity. Okay, and in a nutshell, guys, what we see in the fossil record is a lot of inbreeding, a lot of species that have migrated to certain parts of the world, including islands that we see with Homo naledi, that we see with Floresiensis, Luzonensis. We see isolated populations that start to inbreed, and over the generations, what you get is founder effects, and you get mutation accumulation where these anomalies actually get fixed. And that's actually what best explains a lot of these anomalies. So you're looking at human people groups who have degenerated, essentially. We can even build phylogenies and show you the separation of apes and humans. The point is, and the answer to the question is, no, we don't see anything that's transitional. We see evidence for essentially biblical creation and migration after Babel. We do not see evidence for this ape to man evolutionary story. Real quick on the whale evolution, and then get your thoughts as well, George, is all of their so-called icons when it comes to whale evolution have been looked at. Okay, so right here, fascinating article. Ambulocetus, at best, was a water-adapted mammal. Finding a water-adapted mammal such as an otter does not make that animal a walking whale and does not prove whale evolution. Okay, and we've even got secularists like Dr. Gendrich from the University of Michigan casting doubt on some of these icons like Ambulocetus. For example, he noticed very crocodile-like features of Ambulocetus and now doubts its inclusion into the whale lineage. Same with Pakicetus. Pakicetus has gone through massive changes in terms of its depictions, okay? So right here is some good information. The presumed transitional forms, including Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, and Rhodocetus, are highly questionable. The claim that these are all whale precursors is based more on speculation and wishful thinking. Remember, guys, we have a lot of imagination. We have a lot of speculation, wishful thinking, because they assume deep time evolution is true. They assume whales had to have evolved, and therefore they're looking at this fossil record, oftentimes dealing with a lot of fragments, and they're building a story that's not necessarily true. Look at this. Pakicetus, formerly assumed to be a fully aquatic mammal, has undergone a drastic revision and is now portrayed as an ordinary land mammal, far from being a primitive cetacean. Okay, so you can go through all this information and see for yourself that all their so-called best transitionals have been dealt with. But most importantly, when we actually look to the genetics, when we look to the genotype, we can see that the necessary changes to take a land mammal into something like a whale are just not possible, especially because most changes we see are reductive in nature. They're deleterious, functionally compromising. And even if you give them their time frame from land mammal like a Pakicetus to whale, the types of changes necessary, such as enormous lung capacity with efficient oxygen exchange for long dives, a powerful tail with large horizontal flukes enabling very strong swimming. Their eyes need to be changed, eyes designed to see properly in water. Okay, ears, their skin lacking hair and sweat glands, the nostrils on the top of the head, right? Their blowholes, there's some massive features there. So even if you give them their time frame, within the time frame that they say, I think it's only like 6 to 10 million years from land mammal to whale, okay, there's not enough time based on what we know about fixation rates for your land mammal to evolve these types of novel features into a whale. And then some of their lines of evidence that they look to, like the so-called vestigial pelvis, just like your junk DNA, which is nothing more than vestigial DNA, the vestigial arguments applied now to genetics. That's all been overturned. For example, new study turns a long accepted evolutionary assumption on its head, finding that whale pelvic bones play a key role in mating. So in a nutshell, guys, no, there's no clear transition from land mammal to whale. There's no clear transition when it comes to ape to man evolution, and the genetics and fixation rates. Okay, there's a huge waiting time problem for these types of novel changes anyway. So that's long-winded, but it's definitely a question that requires a detailed answer. George, what are your thoughts, brother?
I totally concur. The most recent example that I read was they found a whale with legs, which sort of proved the evolutionary, lineage. But when you actually, by the way, if anyone hears these arguments, ask them how many bones were actually found. And if you see the actual evidence of this specific whale that walked, it's nothing more than an interpretation based on a few bones that they actually found. And the interesting part was when they actually looked at it in more detail, it was nothing more than an alligator or a crocodile. But I'll cite examples of Nebraska man, a pig's tooth was made to look like a prehistoric human. Piltdown man. There's so many examples of just interpretations with vivid imagination added into it to create a mythical creature that somehow fits between the lineage of, a common ape sort of ancestor to a human. It's just laughable that people can believe these kind of stories.
Yes.
But
In my
look, just one moment, David. I just got something I got to add because to answer that question, this is a press release from the American Museum of Natural History. This pretty much sums it up. Okay, they say intrinsically, such narratives have not drastically changed since Darwin. We must be aware of confirmation biases and ad hoc interpretations by researchers aiming to confer their new fossil the starring role with a pre-existing narrative. Evolutionary scenarios are appealing because they provide plausible explanation based on current knowledge, but unless grounded in testable hypotheses, they are no more than just so stories. Overall, the researchers found that most stories of human origins are not compatible with the fossils that we have today. What more do you want than the American Museum of Natural History saying that to convince you that there are no compatible fossils that prove human origins?
Okay, thank you for your patience, friends. I have to take my computer this coming week to the one hour away local computer guru, see what my problem is, but I'm back now and I can see what I'm doing. Standing for Truth, may I go ahead and give my next 20-minute summary? George, is it okay if I go ahead and give my next 20-minute summary now?
Yeah, sure. You've got the screen, David. I think Donnie might have stepped away for a second or two.
No problem. Let's go back to our original point. Our original point was that evolution is useless. I hope you've seen in our discussion that as far as we're talking about the origin of copper, lead, zinc, and crude oil and so forth, or the origin of explaining DNA, or the explanation of Piltdown man and Neanderthal man and so forth, reminds me of a great anecdote that Dr. Dwayne Gish used to use in the 1970s and 80s when he would debate the creation evolution thing. He said, take Neanderthal men. He said, I went to the University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley. He always used a joke before it was a riot. So after World War II, Dwayne Gish, who was a tank commander during World War II, came back and got his PhD from UC Berkeley. And he said, you could dress Neanderthal up in a hat and suit and walk him down through the campus of Berkeley, and no one would even notice a difference. So a lot of people have a prominent brow ridge and so forth, and so it's a foolish argument. Okay, now let's go on to my next point, and that is the evolutionary viewpoint of deep time is useless in trying to determine where petroleum is. So let's think about how the evolutionary community would use an argument like this. If you look at this map behind me, and this is a map of gravity called a Bouguer gravity map, and we'll talk about that some more, but if you're curious to know the spelling of it, this is the correct way to spell Bouguer gravity anomaly map. And this is northern Michigan, Lake Superior behind me. And it turns out that most of that map that you see there indicates the gravity signature of rocks without fossils. The part that I've colored in here in yellow around Lake Michigan is sedimentary rocks. The rest of them up in this area, let me use my drumstick here. In this area up here, they're all igneous and metamorphic rocks without fossils in them. You have to go down to the southeast corner to actually go down to the area of Lake Michigan to be able to find sedimentary rocks. Now, why would I use this map in that way? Well, two reasons. First one is if the evolutionary community looks at rocks that are, let's say, Cambrian rocks, the correct way, using the evolutionary old Earth paradigm, would be to say, well, not enough biological material has evolved 600 million years ago to die and then create a really good group of reservoir rocks for petroleum to form in. And so the evolutionary prediction, to use the Play-Doh here that we've used so many times before, is if we have a group of rocks that are very old from the evolutionary standpoint, let's say that they're 100 million years old or 1 billion years old. And then on top of them, we find the blue rocks of Cambrian, like I was talking about, Professor Sedgwick with trilobites in it, the Tapete sandstone, what Tim Clary calls the Salk sequence. If we find those and we find an upside down, this would be a smiley face called a syncline. Upside down syncline is called an anticline. And in an anticlinal structure like this, you have what's called a structural trap. And so the evolutionary community would never think that crude oil would migrate up into a trap where the bottommost rocks are rocks that contain no fossils, in other words, Precambrian rocks, and the blue ones on top of it would not be old enough to what would be called mature into petroleum source rocks or form a reservoir. Well, in my training, the structural geologist, the petroleum geologist, Leonard Harris, you can look up him on the internet. He's passed on now, but his papers are still there with the United States Geological Survey. As a young geologist, he took me out to look at these stromatolitic units that are in the Canberra Ordovician of East Tennessee. And then he was working one day and he discovered that in the Great Smoky Mountains, there were igneous and metamorphic rocks that had been faulted during the time of the Great Flood and was on top of these other rocks. And so he made the audacious suggestion to the petroleum geologist that they drill through, using my drumstick here as an example, that they drill through these rocks which are in a part of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park called Cades Cove, if you've been there, that they drill through those and actually go through Precambrian rocks and contact the rocks that contain the petroleum reserves underneath. Now, that is a viewpoint that is fully consistent with young Earth flood geology, but is not consistent with evolution and deep time. Okay, now the final point that I want to make today involves this gravity map behind me called a Bouguer gravity map. In the 70s, I took geophysics as a student, both at the University of Tennessee and at Michigan, and I learned how to construct this map. And the way you should think about it, now I'll move it a bit closer here so you can see. The reds are high gravity, and the cool colors, the yellows and the blues, are low gravity. Now let's think about this from a common sense standpoint. This rock is from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And George, to your eye, can you see a green color when I put it near the camera?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, this is a green copper mineral in the igneous rocks there from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And this rock, if you hold it with the weak muscles of your hand, that is called the heft. You don't do it this way. You don't use the biceps, you use the triceps. This is a heavy rock. And so if it's underneath other rocks and you take a machine called a gravity meter and you fly it over the top of it, what would you predict, George? Would the gravity be greater when you've got a copper deposit underneath this or not?
I missed that, David, because I was reading some of my notes.
Okay. This is a very heavy rock. It
Yep.
contains copper.
Yep.
It also contains iron. If this heavy rock gets buried under sediment and
Yep.
you fly a gravitometer over it, gravity meter, would you expect the gravity to be higher or lower?
Higher.
Higher, exactly,
Yeah.
because this is more dense. And so the red areas, by the way, why would I have drumsticks? I would have drumsticks because George and I are going to start a band, a rock band. And listen to me.
A rock band.
A rock band. Listen to me as I hit my computer. I sure hope I don't bust it. That's the drum roll of the death of old Earth geology. That's a drum roll of the death of evolutionary geology. But we'll do that another day. We got to get our T-shirt made. There's all kinds of plans. We plan to have a tour in Australia, a tour in America, may even go to Canada. But at any rate, humor to one side. These red zones here, get my hard to move right and left and know what I'm doing. There we go. Finally, there we go. Here. This red zone here is a group of Precambrian rocks that are rich in iron and copper. There is a peninsula in Michigan on this map called the Keweenaw Peninsula. And the Keweenaw Peninsula has copper deposits. The area that I've highlighted on this map down in what's called the Michigan Basin, which is immediately over my shoulder here. Can you see, George, that those colors are lighter? Those are lighter colors.
Yep.
That means that the gravity there, the relative gravity, is less. And so you might find crude oil above my right shoulder here. But if you go up, see if I can move my hand properly. If you go up to here, you find iron ores and copper. What's my point? By going to the field and understanding the nature of rocks and looking at what are called structural traps in petroleum geology, this is how you find crude oil. This is how you find the natural gas deposits. You do not find them by saying, oh, these rocks are 500 or 600 million years old. We'll never find gold gas there. We'll never find crude oil there. And then the converse is true. You don't say, oh, I know where to find crude oil. I'm going to go to rocks that are between 100 and 200 million years old. There's plenty of time for things to decay and die and fall and become petroleum source rocks. If you go to ICR's website and search my name, McQueen, you'll find the essay that I wrote back in the 80s that deals with the origin of crude oil in the context of Noah's flood. As a homework assignment, I would suggest that you look at that. Now, the map beside me here is an example of the kind of map that's used by modern petroleum geologists and, for that matter, people searching for copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver to be able to find it. So let's go back to the Bible now, and let's ask ourselves the question, you've got these very rich copper deposits in Michigan that are not associated with a fossil shark tooth like this. This is a big shark, George. They have big sharks in Texas, I guess. And this is a big shark tooth called Megalodon. So you're not going to find the copper deposits there. You're going to find them in these Precambrian rocks up here. How did we discover them? Again, this is an argument for God's grace. I pointed out last hour that the enormous fields in Kuwait and Saudi were found quite easily by the descendants of Noah as they moved from obviously where the ark was to the building of the Tower of Babel, and then from the Tower of Babel through the rest of the world. As they moved, they discovered things of use. And so let's imagine the people that came across the land bridge from Siberia to modern Alaska. But instead of going down the west coast of California, where they could find and discover surfboards that would allow them to surf like the Beach Boys. No, Beach Boys weren't there then, were they? At any rate, they didn't go down toward California. They went across the Rocky Mountains to the east and moved all the way to Michigan. So they followed maybe what is the modern Canada-U.S. border and kept on going. As a matter of fact, on the map behind me, it is divided by the Canadian and U.S. Border, since that particular border goes through what's called Lake Superior. So they end up on this Keweenaw Peninsula, and they're walking around, and a bunch of the teenagers run ahead of their moms and dads, and they trip and fall and cut their legs. And so the mama's mad, everybody's mad, but then they go up and see what they cut their legs on, and it turns out it was pieces of native copper, in other words, pure copper, that was protruding out of the rocks in the ground. And these descendants, what would be called Native Americans, tripped over it. They fell into it. Now, without comedy, what does that mean? Without comedy, this is what it means. God intended mankind to move from the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century to a point where you have metallurgy, copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver, that allowed Gutenberg to build his press. And the first book to be printed on his press was what, George? Let's do a test here. What was the first book that Gutenberg printed on his press?
The Bible.
The Bible, exactly. And so God's grace is evident in this situation. And so how do we know where the modern world finds these deposits? They went back, and by they, I mean the Europeans that came to America, a lot of Germans, a lot of people from the Cornish area of England migrated up to Michigan because the weather reminded them of home. And these old Cornish miners were walking around and they found these old Indian digs. And they said, well, Shazam, Andy, let's go ahead and dig down here and see what we can find. And they found the largest native copper deposit in North America. As a matter of fact, if you had to take electrical engineering, George, you may have had to look up the resistance and the conductivity of copper wire. Did you ever have to do that?
Yes, we did a whole year of electrical. Yep.
Okay, and so it turns out for the standard for the electrical industry all the way up into the 20th century was Michigan copper. It is so pure that it formed the definition of copper resistance, conductivity, and so forth. And so these deposits, by God's grace, brought us up to the point, how can the gospel go worldwide? For heaven's sakes, George, I guess would have to travel a day to California, and then another day to Hawaii, and then another day to Eastern Australia to visit you. So in 3 days, I can be from the South Louisiana all the way, and you and I can walk the shores of the Great Barrier Reef. That's amazing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So
The world is a small place.
it's a small place. So, George, let me turn it over to you, and let's see where we are here. We're at the hour 30 mark. You go ahead and take it, and then we'll end it with Q&A.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Look, most of you know that I'm a retired engineer, and about 25 years ago, my profession actually changed from design into asset management. As part of that responsibility, I was requested to maintain community assets that were valued probably $5 to $6 billion worth. But at the time, there was really nothing specific in the computer industry in terms of software that we could use to use in order to maintain and manage those assets. So what I did, I did a full year of a computer science post-grad degree. And one of the things that I found through that process is, apart from programming languages and algorithms, I really took note of the algorithm section because I had to access data from a number of tables to create these reports that governments were after. So that sort of made me think about what our friend Bill Morgan said a few weeks ago in a stream where he talked about feedback systems. When you really look at feedback systems, they are really nothing more than algorithms. They are decision matrices. And that just shows you that random processes can never form these algorithms. How can they? How can random processes have forward thinking as well as make decisions based on your genome? I believe there's something like 4 to 8 million switches that are, we don't know actually what they all do, but that's one of yes, yeah. So really, I thought that was very interesting by what Bill was saying about the various feedback systems that are in all living organisms. Having done some basic biology, I'm just trying to find my notes here. Like most biologists will remember the acronym Mrs. Gren. Each one of those letters stands for, and I'll explain. M is for movement. R is for respiration. S is for sensitivity. G is for growth. R is for reproduction. E is for excretion. And N is for nutrition. Now, this is what Biology 101 says. These all have to be working for life to begin. How do these evolve separately? It's unbelievable that people can think life somehow evolved without those individual components all being together at the same time. It's really ridiculous. That's why I say the evolution theory is useless, because it can't explain anything. They just use it to prop up their myth. I've got some
One vocabulary that you all have taught me in the last months is the vocabulary of rescue device. The evolutionary community, many of my students, some of my students, I should say, ended up working for major oil companies. And even though they were trained in flood geology, they couldn't go to lunch with these senior geologists. They couldn't go to supper with them and start talking about, oh, Cambrian Ordovician, that's this or that. It turns out they did not use evolution to find oil for BP and Shell and Exxon and others. But in order to keep their jobs, they couldn't go around talking about it. Now, you've seen that kind of discrimination, the two of you, I'm sure, in your experience. Is that not true?
Oh yeah. I was going to say, as an engineer, having designed numerous buildings, roads, drains, water quality devices, I'll lose track of all the different areas that I've been involved in. But one of the things that comes out of that engineering background, I often look at design and it's recognizable, by the way. Most evolutionists would probably disagree, but this is my definition of design. It is unity in integrated functional complexity with a purpose. There is evidence. This requires evidence of foresight and planning. Now, people, the alternative of directed evolution is a complete oxymoron. How can evolution be directed? It can't be. As I stated, that Mrs. Grant acronym, movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, nutrition, all have to be there at the same time. They can't evolve separately. That's why evolution is useless, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I concur with that, because it's time plus chance and impersonal forces. Donnie, you want to take another question now from the audience?
Can I just add one more thing? I'll just share my screen before we go to the questions. This is a quote. Can you see that?
Yes.
This is from a PhD biology lecturer at the University of Chester in England. He says, perhaps part of the problem in convincing medical practitioners to embrace evolution is the nature of the science. Evolutionary hypotheses are notoriously hard to investigate. Add to this the fact that the field has failed so far to provide clinically useful findings, and you see why medical schools lack interest. There is much about explanation and understanding, but little about treating and curing. So the medical industry don't consider evolutionary theory as very important in their field.
Yes, it's a point very well taken. Okay, Standing for Truth, let's take our next question, please.
Well, great information, great show, gentlemen. Professor McQueen, we've had a great chat. Over 50 people, pretty well the whole time. So, that's proof. People missed you, Professor McQueen. You are a wealth of information.
Well, I miss being here.
It's been a great show. Time is flying by, I got to say that. So, that being said, let's get through some of these questions then. That is a good idea, brothers. So, here's a question that came in from Lord Have Mercy. If it's an objective fact that diamonds can form rapidly, then why can't old earthers just appeal to that to explain the presence of C14 in the diamonds?
Okay, let me draw a diagram that helps those of you that may not have been part of a discussion that George and I had a while back about this whole issue of carbon-14 in diamonds. I'll let George elaborate on that. But let me make sure that our classroom correctly understands where these major diamond mines in South Africa come from, and draw a diagram here. Now, class, you'll recall that if I draw a tree, that means I'm drawing a cross section. And so let me draw what's called a kimberlite pipe. And I'll put a group of X's here to indicate where this explosive igneous rock comes from. So here is the South Africa, the kimberlite pipes, the most famous diamond mines going back decades and decades. Okay, the evolutionary community offers no valuable information to the owners of these mines. Why? Because they have, not for decades, but for centuries, dug down, and let me put a group of marks here showing where they've dug down into the ground, and they have found these diamonds. Now, remember that one of the textbooks that I want all of you guys to own by Christmas is my book, the Mineral Book. And if you look in that book to page 17 and on past 17, all the way up into where I talk about diamonds, this would be page 57 for those of you that already have it. You can look into this in great detail. But one of the things I want you to be clear on is that when you look at the issue of diamonds, you've got to look at what's called the C's. Now, some of you may know the 4 C's. They are color, carat, clarity, and cut. Well, clarity means, does it have inclusions in it? And see, this clarity thing has been known, again, not just for decades, but for centuries. If you cut a diamond and look at it, there are inclusions in there. And those inclusions modify the value of that diamond. But see, some of those inclusions are not just the element carbon from the periodic table. They are radioactive carbon. They are carbon-14. Now let's pause for a minute. As we've pointed out in the past, George and I, these are supposed to have erupted from the upper mantle. They're supposed to be not 1 million years old, but 1 billion years old. How could a mineral, and that's what a diamond is, how could a mineral contain detectable radioactive carbon, detectable carbon-14, when it's got a half-life of 4,000, 5,000? And even the archaeologists don't even consider it useful for 50,000 years. Quite a problem, isn't it, George?
Oh yeah. Well, see, it's laced in old Earth geology, because they claim you need the heat and pressure at those depths to actually generate the diamond, and they can't agree to those diamonds being formed quickly, because that does away with their deep time narrative.
Exactly.
And of course, we know that the C14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, and we find intrinsic C14 in these diamonds, which proves that they're much, much younger than the billion years that they claim they are.
Okay, Standing for Truth, give us another question. This is fun.
Another great response, Professor McQueen and George. You guys are awesome. So this next question comes in from XDman06. I appreciate the question, XDman. His question is, how would you disprove those who say that there are volcanoes that erupted millions of years ago? And then he says, love what you guys are doing. XDman, I appreciate the compliments, brother.
Okay, I'll start with that. And again, standing for truth stands for biblical truth. So if we go back, and let me get, tonight I chose to bring only the New Testament, but let's go in the New Testament to 2 Peter and read a passage that you've heard on Standing for Truth many times. And this is 2 Peter 3, and I'll begin reading in verse 3. First, be aware of this. Scoffers will come in the last days to scoff, living according to their own desire, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they have been since the beginning. Wait, I'm a geologist. I've been taught that word. It begins with the letter U. It's called uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past. All things continue just as it has been. And notice what he says here. They willingly ignore this, that long ago the heavens and the earth were brought out from water and through water by the word of God. Let's see, that would be the creation, wouldn't it? Through these waters, the world of that time perished when it was flooded. Now, the Greek word used there is cataclysmos, from which we get catastrophe. And so the Great Flood was a catastrophic year-long event. But it goes on. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and the destruction of ungodly men. When I was a student at the University of Tennessee 50 years ago, I would take my lunch break and talk with a bunch of fraternity brothers. And they would say, oh, McQueen, I don't want to talk about Jesus. I'm enjoying my life of drinking and many girlfriends and all these other things. When I go to hell, we're just going to have one big party. Well, C.S. Lewis provided the best counter argument to this, and that is the gates of hell are locked from the inside. These are people that give this argument that say, oh, the earth is millions of years old. The Bible can't be trusted. We don't have to be accountable to a creator. Something that I've started using in my teaching, George, that you may have noticed, when you and I first began this tag team effort, I would say that the Lord Jesus is the creator, the savior, and the coming king. Well, I've now added a fourth phrase to that. The Lord Jesus is the creator, but he is the offended creator. Mankind sinned, and so it's offensive to God. These fraternity brothers can say, oh, we're just going to party in hell. Well, it turns out I live in Louisiana, where for the last 2 months it's been 100 degrees every day. So I've lived in hell. I know that I'll go to heaven. A little bit of theological humor there. All joking to one side, this issue of standing for truth, standing for biblical truth, ties into this old earth argument. The old earth argument is a theological rescue device so you don't have to face your creator. Makes
David,
sense?
David, do you think there's pizza in heaven?
Oh, there must be, because there are Italians in heaven.
Look, while we're on the subject of the volcanoes, Jamie Russell actually posed the question, is there any evidence for magma interacting with underground water? Jamie, most volcanoes, when they erupt, you'll find a big component of the gases released is water vapor. So, yeah, I reckon there is lots of evidence that magma interacts with underground water.
And I would add to that, you need to travel, my friend, 3 places: New Zealand, Iceland,
Yep.
and Yellowstone in the Western United States. Those are 3 areas where there are geysers. And there is a magma chamber in all those 3 areas. And the very famous American glacier called Old Faithful has been erupting for over 100 years because a chamber filled with groundwater is heated by magma and goes up there. Ms. McQueen and I have visited that. Our oldest son took his family out there. I'm so glad that the whole thing didn't erupt. I don't care much about my son, but the grandchildren, I'm just playing with you. The grandchildren are important to me. Go ahead.
So here's another question that comes in. This comes in the form of a super chat from Lord Have Mercy. Thank you so much for the support, the super chat, and the question. So question, Professor McQueen, how does Professor McQueen's flood model explain the Uluru, Uluru, and Katajuta, hopefully I said that right, formations in Australia? God bless everyone. God bless you too.
That's true. I'll use when the Westerners came into Australia, because they were evolutionists, they kind of looked down on the Aboriginals. Well, it turns out the Aboriginals were smarter than they were, and now they're politically smart, and so they've changed the name of Ayers Rock to Uluru. Is that the way you say it, George?
It's correct. Yep.
When Ms. McQueen and I visit George in the next few years, he assures me it takes not hours, but several days to drive from his house to literally the middle of nowhere where Ayers Rock is. But when we get there, you find a remarkable geologic formation. We're coming up on the last 20 minutes here, so we don't have time to look into it. But Lord have mercy, write down this reference. Dr. Gary Parker, Parker, has written a whole series of books called Building Blocks. And you can find these online. Building Blocks of Biology, Building Blocks of Science. Well, he's got one, Building Blocks of Earth Science. And in it, there are several hundred words of explanation for Ayers Rock. The Kata area showed up on my screen the other day as a screensaver. Do you know much about that area? Where is that's in northern Australia someplace, isn't it?
I don't know much about it, but if we ever do go to Uluru, David, we'll go first class on a train, okay?
Oh, that'd be great. I don't want to drive. On a train, it's what, 24 hours to get there?
Yeah, something like that. It's quite a nice quite a nice train ride actually, but most of it's during the night, so you don't see much. And then when you do, all you see is desert followed by more desert.
Be sure to bring your dog because I'll need a pillow.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Donnie, can I just address something that Andrew Cumming, the challenge for debate, mate? I'm a researcher, but I've given Andrew all these references of all the incongruencies in this phylogenetic tree, and he just hand waves them away. I just read a quote from the American Museum of Natural History that says the human fossils don't show anything. They're just so stories. So why would you debate anyone who hand waves away their own evidence, their own secular evidence?
Now let me comment on that about human evolution, going back to what the late Dr. Dwayne Gish and the late Dr. Henry Morris taught me in the 1980s. If you gather up all of these fossils, the Australopithecines, the Lucies, the bones that Louis Leakey found. Louis Leakey was homeschooled by his dad in Africa, and he's the only example I know of a failed homeschooler. The guy didn't know anything. If it hadn't been for the locals, the native Africans, he would have never found anything. But they go out and find things, and then he'd come back and lecture. His son would lecture and so forth and earn all kinds of money. What's my point? If you gather all of those fossils up of these supposed human ancestors, they will fit into one human coffin. And then when you take them out and lay them on the table, you go back to the work of Solly Zuckerman and others that have looked at these fossils statistically, and it turns out that some of these fossils are clearly ape-like from their dentition. Others are clearly Homo sapiens. And so you don't find any transition there. You find what statisticians call a binomial distribution of truly apes and truly men. You ever read about their arguments, George, over the years?
No, I haven't.
It'd
But
be-
I
it's
always like to
40-year-old
research
stuff, but it's
and
still
learn
good
new
stuff.
things.
Yeah, it's
And what-
40-year-old stuff, but it's still good stuff.
And one thing I'll say before we move on to the next question, fantastic answers, brothers George and David. I would challenge anybody when it comes to this phylogenetic argument to watch our video yesterday where Dr. Fuzron and myself addressed that in great detail, because I've pointed out that phylogenetics oftentimes most of the time assumes that these genetic markers that they're looking at, for example, pseudogenes, ERVs, or just mutation distributions in general, are actually the result of mutations. But last night, we demonstrated that no, most of these genetic sequences and genetic markers are actually functional DNA elements, like the pseudogenes, the ERVs, and most of the genome is proving to be functional. That means these hierarchies and the data derived from these phylogenetic trees
Excellent answer.
not descent.
Excellent answer, Donnie. I'll add one other thing.
Sure.
When people begin to walk down the path of amoeba to man evolution, get them over on plants. How do you get from a bean to McQueen? Not fish to gish, but let's go over to explain to me how a fern evolves into, let's say they're called conifers or gymnosperms, and then things like, what would be a good example, like a maple tree, an angiosperm. I think I'm not using the right vocabulary. At any rate, how do you get pine trees and maple trees evolving from ferns? Oh, well, what you do is you go to the coal seams, McQueen, and you go look in the Carboniferous or the Mississippi and Pennsylvania and U.S. Well, when you do this, like Steve Austin did for his PhD work at Penn State in '79, what do you find? You find polystrate trees, you find enormous ferns, but you don't find any pine trees. You don't find any maple trees. They're floating above that in the floodwaters. And so if you think the phylogeny of going from an oyster to a reptile and amphibian and all the way up to man is a problem, try to go from, what are they called? They grow on rocks, like moss to ferns to pine trees.
McQueen, you just don't understand evolution.
Well, sadly, I don't understand it. Don't
Could I just share the screen for a little while, just to show you and make a point that evolution is useless because it can't explain anything. I'm just going to share this screen, and I've asked this question of evolutionists, and no one has actually given me a plausible answer. Okay, so everybody knows the monarch butterfly, right? Can somebody tell me? Oh, before that, I'll read the quote just below it by Charles Darwin. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existing which could not possibly have been informed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would actually absolutely break down. Okay, let's look at the monarch butterfly. The caterpillar goes from 12 legs to 6 legs, goes from 13 segment body to a 10 segment body, goes from 6 simple eyes to 2 compound plus 2 simple eyes. It goes from no sex organs, make a note of that, no sex organs to having sex organs. It goes from chewing jaws to coil sucking tube, no wings to 2 pairs of wings. Now, come on, guys. Tell me, how could that happen in successive evolutionary stages to go from no sex organs to having sex organs? Which one came first to reproduce? Was it the butterfly or the caterpillar?
Let me put my 2 cents in there using my pocket watch. The design argument that George just gave using a butterfly is exactly what the old guys, Brother Paley talked about You walk along a beach, you find a butterfly or a pocket watch. When you pick it up and look at it, you say, somewhere there's a watchmaker. Now, the evolutionary community will say, oh, George, we can explain that stupid caterpillar butterfly thing by having a blind watchmaker. Oh, come on. Give me a break. This is clear evidence of design. And that's why from now through the next 5 years, every month, some part of Standing for Truth will come back to the design argument. You can't get past it. Right, George?
Correct. And just to give you an idea of how evolutionists hand wave away, I read with interest one of the comments from the chat about incongruencies. He said, incongruencies mean nothing, George. Of course they hand wave it away, right? I'll give you another example of the flagello.
Well, George, if I could say
Yeah.
so, I've had a lot of debates. I've actually had debates with that critic, and we appreciate that he's at least willing to engage us and engage the argument. So I do appreciate.
I love Andrew. I mean, I've got nothing against him, but you just can't hand wave away your own evidence. Really, it's just not honest.
Now, since we've been talking a lot,
I just want to make one point real quick before I forget, is that when it comes to these phylogenetic trees and when it comes to the incongruencies, I have shown quote after quote from evolutionists and those that really focus on cladistics and these classification schemes and systematics, where they admit that they assume there's a tree, they assume there's ancestry, they assume that all life goes back to a common ancestor before they go into the categorizing of various creatures based on morphology, anatomy, and genetics. So the point I'm trying to make is they assume evolution to prove evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I make a final point? I've got to end my time here in a couple of minutes.
Go ahead, Professor.
What am I holding up here, and what is the length of a U.S. dollar bill? Do either of you know? What is the length of a U.S. dollar bill?
I know 5 inches.
No, it's 6 inches, as it turns out.
6, okay.
But why is this called the almighty dollar? And why do people ignore the fact, when we present the arguments we have for the last 2 hours, that evolution is useless? Because if they're a university professor at a school that offers 2 things, a 10-month contract, and at the University of Michigan, every 7 years, you get at least 2/3 of your salary and have a complete year off called a sabbatical year. If you have a wonderful job like that pays far more than $1 an hour for you to do it, you're not going to become a creationist. Why? Your dean is going to say, there's the door. Are you aware that Standing for Truth pays McQueen 100 Chinese yen a year? That could be your salary. And so it's the almighty dollar that keeps these people towing the line. Let's use astronomy, for example. I have heard there's only there are only 1,000 astronomy jobs in America. Most of them are based around universities. If these guys actually bought into what Russ Humphreys and others have saying about a universe being 6,000 years old, not billions, they would immediately lose their jobs. And if they lost their jobs, there are 10 astronomers working at McDonald's flipping burgers. They would be in line for their job. It's the almighty dollar.
Yeah. And on the subject of astronomy, this is a scientist's estimate. They reckon there's 10 to the 23rd power stars. That's 1 followed by 23 zeros. And if you look at the maths in a 13.5 billion year old universe, that equates to 14 million stars born every minute. And if you include into that the planets around every star, it becomes ridiculous. But the interesting part is there's a couple explanations that they actually go to with the star formation issue. They talk about oh yeah, it takes the force of one star exploding to create another one. So it begs the question, how did the first star form? And then they come up with another rescue device. I'm not sure if you know about the Jeans mass constant, but that's riddled in assumptions as well, because that's based on dark matter and dark energy, which are also assumptions. So they've based a constant which is based on assumptions that are based on assumptions.
Yeah.
So the whole process is ridiculous. But David, before you go, I've got a lawyer joke for you. So I don't know if Donnie wants to add something.
Yes, please. I
Before
need
you
a joke.
Before you say that joke, there's a question that came in several times from Saved by Grace. God bless you, Saved by Grace. I appreciate the patience. He really wants to ask you, Professor McQueen, what your thoughts are on the Nebraska man, the failed Nebraska man. How does that apply to why evolution is useless?
Well, it's just what you and George have said for the last 2 hours. It's a rescue device. The evolutionary community needed some proof of human evolution. And so Nebraska man, Piltdown man, all the other hoaxes that have been exposed over the years are a rescue device that was used. And some of these devices go all the way back to early suggestions in 1800, 1850, 1900, and so forth. We need proof to show that man has evolved. Why? Because if we can prove that man has evolved, you don't need a creator, because man begins to tell his own story. But we as creationists believe that history, now students, write that word out, history is actually 2 words. It's his story.
Yeah.
History.
And I want to say one thing, George, before you make your final joke, because a lot of these people, these critics like Andrew, although we appreciate him, he's just so wrong on universal common ancestry, because I've demonstrated that if humans are not related to chimpanzees, if humans are created separate, and as the Bible says, specially created, made in the image of God, that actually destroys universal common ancestry. Because what universal means is that all life, including plants and animals, are universally related. If you can demonstrate through genetics, biology, whatever it is, that humans are not part of that universal phylogenetic tree of life, that actually refutes universal ancestry. So I want to put the challenge out there that if Andrew or any skeptic wants to debate the topic, are humans and chimpanzees related through common ancestry? Let me know. Send me an email. I will debate you. We'll make it a formal debate here on this channel, because I'm confident that I can show how humans are not related to chimpanzees, and thus refuting universal ancestry.
I will add my challenge before George tells his joke. If anybody wants to debate me on the origin of crude oil and refute any of these arguments that I've made, contact Standing for Truth. I'm ready to go. I'm anxious. I'll even get your mailing address and send you an autographed copy of my book if you'll debate me.
Awesome. There's 2 challenges. Origin of crude oil. If you're interested in debating Professor McQueen on it, our team geologist, please email me. Professor McQueen, you got some fans. Keith says Professor McQueen is terrific. I agree. Professor McQueen, you are terrific. And
that's kind. Now, George, tell me a joke, and then I've got to go.
Okay, before I tell the joke, I'll just finish off with something that's very appropriate, and then I'll tell you the joke, okay? I'm going to share the screen so you can actually see what I'm about to show. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Can you see that? Okay. This is very pertinent here. When you feel your position is true and or defensible, you defend it, correct?
Yes.
When you feel your position is weak and indefensible, attempt to silence or attack the other party. Okay, everyone in the chat, I think, knows what I'm talking about there. Why is it that when we attack evolutionary theory, we consider it weak well, we consider it weak and indefensible. That's why we're attacked by the other party. Now for my joke.
Yes.
I'll just stop sharing. Okay, it's an engineer versus lawyer joke. Okay.
Good.
There was once an engineer who found a magic lamp. When he rubbed it, a genie jumped out and said to him, "You got 3 wishes, but there is a catch. This wish system of mine was designed by a lawyer. So whatever you wish for, every lawyer in the world will get double of." So the engineer thought about it and said, and then replied, says, "Oh, that's no problem. I can live with that." He then said, "For my first wish, I wish I had a Ferrari." "Okay," said the genie, and a Ferrari appeared in front of the engineer. "But remember, every lawyer in the world now has 2 Ferraris," the genie told the engineer.
Yes.
The engineer remained unperturbed and said, "For my second wish, I wish for $1 million. So $1 million appeared in front of the engineer, and the genie said, "Remember, every lawyer in the world now has $2 million. The engineer, rubbed his chin. He said, "Okay." The engineer was non-committal and then said, He goes, "I always wished I could donate a kidney."
Yes.
Boom,
And so,
boom.
now they all lost too. And you remind me of a joke. Why should every parent of teenagers have a dog? Standing for truth. What's the answer to that? I've raised 4 teenagers. Every parent of teenagers have a dog because then there would be someone glad to see you come home.
Very true. Very true.
Good night, friends. I'll see you next time.
Dave, don't go. Just quickly, in case you're in this position, this is what not to say to a police officer, okay?
Gotcha.
Number 1, I can't reach my license unless you hold my beer.
That actually happens in the southern part of the United States. That's not a joke. That's
the other one.
Headline. Go ahead.
The other one is, don't say this. Aren't you the guy from the Village People?
You got to be a certain age to appreciate that. Good night, friends.
No worries.
On that note. Bye.
Bye.
God bless,
Bye,
Professor McQueen.
God bless. Say hello to Shirley.
Well, that concludes an epic show. We had a great chat between 50 and 60. We actually hit 60 there by the end of it. Pretty well the entire time. Tons of great questions. I can't believe we're going on 2 hours and 15 minutes. Guys, we had about 5 shows this week. We had a week full of shows, epic shows. We've been busy. We're going to take a few days off from streaming after this, because we got a lot of behind the scenes work to do, as well as some final confirmations in terms of some big debates and interviews that we have over the next couple months. So we're going to be busy bringing you guys the best content. Within those few days, though, I do have a presentation on Homo naledi that I have been working on. So hopefully I'll find a chance to go live probably at night sometime and address the challenges put forth by the evolutionists when it comes to Homo naledi. Also, you heard it here, a couple challenges put forth by Professor McQueen and myself in terms of defending uniformitarianism, or when it comes to me defending universal ancestry, guys. So here's the website. Please pass this around, share this around, share it in your Facebook groups, your Facebook or whatever social media. Let people know that the information is here on this website for in terms of answering challenges and questions. I'm still updating it as shows come in. For example, here, PhD biochemist debunks junk DNA. We dealt with pseudogenes, ERVs, and more. Meet the team. Definitely check that out. Check out the biographies there. And our team geologist, Professor David McQueen, putting out the challenge on crude oil, and myself putting out the challenge to anybody who thinks they can defend the unscientific, ridiculous idea that suggests humans and chimpanzees are related. So that being said, thanks so much to everyone in the chat. George, I'm handing it over to you, brother, for some final words, final thoughts.
I've got a simple message. God bless the skeptics. I hope God opens your eyes.
Amen. Amen. We appreciate when the skeptics are here. We appreciate the challenges. And there are some questions we didn't get a chance to get to, but because we are going on 2.5 hours, we apologize, guys. We will be back here probably next week with Professor McQueen as well. So, go ahead, George.
That's overtime for me. Once you go over 2 hours, you got to pay me triple.
Exactly. So unfortunately, we're going to have to shut down the Standing for Truth ministry because we went over 2 hours and George is going.
And you can't afford it.
Anyway, brother, I'm going to let you get to that cute little puppy of yours. And
no worries, Donnie. See you later, mate. I'm gonna go to the organic market, which is about 10 minutes away. I'll walk my dog over there and buy some organic produce.
Sounds good, brother. Staying healthy. I like it. All right,
worries.
George. God bless. God bless everybody in the chat. We will see you this week, specifically Thursday, for the epic debate between Luca and Ken Hovind. So that being said,
SFT is out.